Q&A with Michael Cox. Welcome back to anyone who joined us last week. We had some brilliant questions last week from lots of viewers. I hope we get through as many as we can again today, because we've had lots of questions to get through. I'm sure most of you already know Michael Cox is principal flute of the BBC Symphony Orchestra, St Martin in the Fields Orchestra, London Sinfonietta and London Mozart Players, and does many other things. He's professor at Royal Academy of Music, and he is artist, but more than just an artist, on principal chairs, sort of founder of principal chairs. And we are here to answer all of your questions that you've sent in today. So,
hi everybody, it's great to be back and welcome, and thanks for the amazing response from last week, because that was really encouraging and lovely. And yeah, if we can start jumping in with questions, because I'm going to try and get through it as much as possible, but as I've mentioned before, we'll just keep going with sessions until we've answered everybody's questions.
Yeah.
So
shall we start? So our first question actually came up from a few viewers. It was originally from Tom Parker on articulation, and he asked, do you have a way of practicing articulation apart from using pieces or tunes designed specifically for articulation? And Catherine Umble also asked, how do you approach articulation, including double tonguing?
This is kind of like a huge subject. So I'll try and kind of keep my whole philosophy as succinct as possible, but it may not be that possible. But I'll talk as much as I can about articulation. And it's very interesting, because I don't know what people's experience is with the teaching of articulation, but I was kind of just told to do it well and given odd little bits of snippets of information, but nothing very cohesive. So it's forced me myself, to actually do quite a lot of thinking around articulation and just what I think is going on or should be going on, and things to relate it to as well. And a revelation for me was actually having singing lessons. And I haven't heard this talked about very much, but it became very obvious to me when I was, as a singer, when I was actually singing the leader and things, that with the use of consonants in song, that the general thing is that you put the consonants before the beat. And only if you're being super emphatic do you go like ta, ta, right on the beats with the consonants. So the king of the procedure is the vowel. The thing in the ascendancy is always the vowel so the actual thing that carries the song. So for us, of course, our sound. But so often, because as soon as we become an intent on good articulation, our focus goes all onto that place, that moment when the tongue actually sounds the consonant. And I think my viewpoint is this is much better thought of as an upbeat to the presentation of the thing that really matters, which is the vowel. And in this sort of way, I think of the tongue as a bit of a social climber, if you know that expression. So this is the kind of person that was going like, me. I'm the most important. Come here, come pay me attention. And in fact, articulation should be lower in the mix of the music making than the actual song of the pieces. So it's, in a way, we always have to make sure we keep it in its place, keep it down, keep it of less significance than the main body of the music making. So what do we think articulation is about? What's the musical benefit? And I think the whole thing is it's to add charm, definition, and I think of it very much like cooking. The main ingredients are there, but unless you add that little bit of spice, it can all get just a little bit wodgy and dull. So you need that variation just to lift the whole. And if you see it as a sort of spice to add to playing, I think it takes on a different kind of role. And basically, the more we focus on it, the worse it seems to go. And I'd sum it all up by saying keep it light, really. So timing's of real importance. So if I'm playing a sound, I'm always thinking of the main note sounding. This I'm going to play without articulation. And then I'm going to add tonguing to that. So, but only ever as a sense of an upbeat to it, unless the music is quite violent or accented. So basically, I'm always checking out that the tonguing is not becoming invasive and explosive. For one thing, often people get into difficulties because often they tend to be slightly on the overproduced side. So that if the tonguing is then in the airstream quite a lot, because the air's shooting out, it will become very explosive very easily. So often it's also a signal that your playing is maybe just a little bit overproduced, and you need to just lift your foot off that accelerator a little bit to let it be a bit calmer. Working at it, what I would do is a lot of legato prototypes. So little phrase groups. I'll just take something like, very simple. Then separate that without tongue. And then add the tonguing on top of that slowly. But keeping as close as to the legato prototype as you possibly can, but also as close to the unruffledness of when you voiced it without the vowel. I think everyone knows their own tonguing, so I very much advise, actually, rather than using great rafts of notes on a page, I would very much look at parts of the instruments that you find the most difficult. Ball shape, and it's very, very difficult to control and get any definition of sound from. But what you want is a short, defined sound. But you're much better off going ha, and then shortening that and going ha, 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 because then you get very defined sound while you're still supporting through. And support is of a massive importance, I think. So generally, when I'm doing a lot of articulated work, I'm keeping the support very rigorously, but not in a pushed dynamic way. But I'm just making sure that there's this real sense of oneness helping me right through all that material. I think another thing just to mention briefly is that sometimes people struggle with the business of the tongue actually shooting a little capsule of air. It's almost like a little bow and arrow going like bing. So you get like a bit of a pea shooter kind of effect. And that's really to watch out for, because the one thing that articulation actually does is disrupt the air, and we want to keep it smooth and ongoing. So anything that actually upsets air is something to be avoided in articulation. Sometimes it's a really good view and going like, is my articulation upsetting the air? And then something else I would say, just as a general observation, is I'm a little bit skeptical myself about the idea of feathering a lot of articulation. This is when with the diaphragm you're sort of going up, ba, 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 as you play the notes. Ha, 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 ha. And I think there's a place for it, but I don't know about you, but things like Handel arias and some Bach arias, when people have passage work and they go like, ha, 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 it drives me up the wall because you hear no line and no definition. And I feel like it's every single note's an individual phrase. And I love trying to bind articulated work together to make, an ongoingness of phrase. The other main thing I'd say about articulation is, can you pass, this is a question we need to ask ourselves, can you pass really smoothly from legato onto articulated work without loss of emotion, without loss of phrasing, and without loss of dynamic? So what you often feel is that there is one sound world for articulation work and another sound world completely for legato work. And it's very, very important to try and line up exactly the same worlds so that you can move absolutely seamlessly from one to the other. And again, that's the sort of thing that you can make up your own exercises for these kind of stuff. And the more we make up our own exercises, this is something I want to talk about a bit more about later, the more I think we become involved, and it's like brilliant fun to be, making our own exploratory journeys, being a pioneer, as it were. And the fact is that loads of other flute players will have done the same kind of journey. But there's something very special about one's own learning, because through a career, you need to be the person who actually self-checks, who self-teaches, who prepares for the gigs. So, essentially we have a period where we are taught, but then the most important bit of our careers is when we self-teach thereafter. So the more you can do that by, exploratory mindset, the better. Last thing, because Catherine asked, I think, is about double tonguing and the difference, with sounding or moving the tongue, using the tongue at the front or the back. And this can just be the front or back of the tongue rather than actually moving it too much. I think sometimes people are mistaken in thinking they need to actually really, really find two hugely different positions, but it's more, within the tongue with some movement. And actually, before I go on with that, the other thing I'd say about the tongue is, I don't know if anyone's seen a whole tongue kind of like outside the body. You can get images of it. It is so gross because basically, it starts obviously just inside your mouth, but it ends up right down here somewhere. And it's big, it's fat, and it's like an enormous big slug. And it's actually incredibly strong muscle because it's only hinged down here with tendons. And it's the only muscle in the body that is not fixed in two places. So usually a muscle will be fixed at the front, and the back, on a finger or whatever. So that flexing can happen. But of course, with the tongue, it needs to be incredibly strong, very, very flexible. It's incredible muscle. It's actually a composite muscle. It's really, really fascinating thing to study in terms of anatomy. And a lot of people get into trouble because with a lot of use of any muscle, muscles tend to bind and bunch up. So all the time I'm using the tonguing, I'm going like refresh, 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 relax. And then you work and then you go relax. But you have to kind of always have that refresh mentality of not allowing the muscle to actually start binding, because we've all had that experience in studies of we start at the top and we think, yeah, this is going really, really well. And then about half a page down, you're going like, where did that go? Yeah. And also, it becomes really spitty and difficult. And this is absolutely to do with the fact that you're allowing the tongue not to relax, or not ensuring the tongue is relaxed. Finally, going back to Catherine's double tonguing business, my viewpoint is that generally in double tonguing, there's a problem because the d of it and the g of it, or the t and the k, whichever you favor. Personally, I go for d and g, are two very different utterances, because one's obviously a guttural stop, what they call a guttural stop, with a g or k. And it's very, very much more explosive. But the other thing is it's got much less of a sort of roll about it. So if I go like da, it can be a long gesture, or a ta, but a doesn't really work. It just is this kind of like really dry thing. And we are used to using it in speech a lot of the time without elongation. So we don't, you can of course go like coo and a word like that. And that is very much actually how we want to use it. But there is a certain, what tends to be is that there's a natural length to the da and then a natural shortness to the ga. And so we're getting like do ga, do ga, do ga, do ga kind of effect, which you hear a lot of people struggling with that with rhythmically. But then also often I think people forget really that always we should be nurturing the length in the backstroke. Last week we talked a bit about French tonguing, so also I'd encourage people to explore that as well.
Yeah, Phew. Brilliant. That's a very thorough answer, but lots of people had asked about articulation, so that's really good to have some information on that. So thank you to Tom and Catherine for your questions.
Indeed.
I forgot to say at the beginning, if anyone watching has any questions, they can comment below the video, and we'll be able to see those, and we'd like to answer some questions from live viewers, and that we'll put those up on the screen. So that'd be brilliant if you think of anything while you're watching. But now, yeah. For now, let's move on to the next one we've had, which is about the pressure of auditions and competitions. And at least three people, in fact, asked this one. First one was Maria, who asked, how do you deal mentally with high pressure situations and competitions? Antonia asked, I would like to know how you prepare for an audition and how you deal with nerves while doing them. And Inna asked, how do you develop artistic freedom on stage? Having played the flute for almost 20 years and I find the following element in my playing. I feel relaxed and free in my body during rehearsals, but when the concert comes, I feel rigid and paralyzed. And I can see this if I record my playing.
Okay, so I'm kind of going to focus, because these three questions have this commonality about them, on the performance nerves kind of thing, or the being under pressure kind of aspect of it, because everyone's voiced it in slightly different ways. But if I focus on that, and Antonia, I might also include a little bit about the audition preparation as part of another question. And I think, Ina, it kind of links in with this feeling that you feel artistic freedom, and then it seems to go out the window a bit. I mean, how many people are there out there that do not have something to say about this, I mean, or some experience of it? I think just generally in musical life, I find it vaguely amusing that, well, I think a lot of us feel we've got a monopoly of problems. I find this really difficult, some aspect of playing. And I just really amuse this, because the longer I go on as a player, I'm more than I know that countless flute players throughout history, as well as, thousands of them now, have exactly the same problems I meet, and going I just know from students, they all go, this bit's really hard. And you're going like, yeah, that's what, me too, I find, because there's just a truth about these things. There just are some aspects that come round as a pattern for all of us. And in my own career, I found, this whole business with performance pressure and nerves and stuff. I mean, I think I've been pretty blessed in not being hugely troubled, but there have been, I've had my moments, and specifically I've had the moments like Ina's talking about, where you feel it can be really frustrating because you feel you deliver better in the rehearsal than in the concert. And I think one thing to first of all to be acknowledged is that when adrenaline's pumping away, I'm not sure one's best judge of how things are going. And so sometimes I think of adrenaline as being this little thing on your shoulder, sitting there, little creature, going, and it's talking all sorts of things to you whilst you're playing, because your brain's speeding, and it's saying all sorts of stuff. And that doesn't, it could be half the thing is because you are in this state and so many thoughts are flickering that it interferes with concentration quite markedly. Ina proves it kind of thing, because she's saying that she's actually watched videos and feels it still to be the case. But I think often people are not their best judges. I can remember once, the time I would say I was most stressed in a concert, or remember being stressed in a concert. And I can remember being so many people coming up afterwards and going like, it was absolutely brilliant tonight. And I was going like, really? And is that what I have to do is that what you have to go through to be brilliant? And I think the long and short of it is we can't really judge it, but it's also just a reality. So there's lots and lots of things to say about this. The main thing, big thing is autopilot. So in all stressful situations, competitions, auditions, big concerts, what are all great musicians relying on, or musicians full stop, is an autopilot. But what I've really noticed about the absolutely amazing people right at the top is their levels of concentration and the feeling that you feel that the imprint within them is so strong. So that's kind of my first point of call, is that I think the thing that will override nerves and adrenaline has to be the strength of the autopilot. So the thing of living it and breathing it and being able to replicate it endlessly. And I think it's a real problem with practice quite often. I was talking with a student about this recently, is that often we take practice as a moment to fixate, to sort of get our scalpel out and go like, oh, that bit's a bit like that, and that bit's a bit like that, and and should I do it this way or that way? And we sometimes forget to actually just deliver big rafts of material successfully. And I think that's the next thing I would say, is that I think often there's a wrong picture for musicians, is that we feel that by the end of the practice that we should have arrived. And I think it's a much better philosophy to always slightly, and I mean, this is only small percentages, but ever so slightly, always have this feeling is, I'm not going to give it the whole thing until the day. So that always there's this goal ahead, and there's a place you're aiming for, and there's always a feeling of flow to that place. But if you've gone like 2 days before, or even worse, actually 5 days before, and you go, that was marvelous. I couldn't guess I would be able to play that so well. And now I think I'm ready. And then 4 days before, it starts going a little less good, and et cetera, et cetera. And because you've thrown everything at it, and then you're getting a bit anxious, it's I think it's very canny always to just hold something back. And that really helps. Now, in terms of other aspects, I'm very interested in this whole kind of sports science-y view of things, and there's been so much more correlation now between music and sports science, which I think is really, really interesting. So these two, I've just been looking online actually recently, in response to these questions, and I've just found something which is called In the Zone, which is run by somebody called Mark Morley Fletcher, who's actually a guitarist. But it looks to me fantastic, and certainly the reviews and testimonials are brilliant. And that is a whole regime about how you practice, how you pace your life, and with the whole thing of all sorts of things from sports science, but also about a regime from practice and approach. And then there's also things like the Bulletproof Musician, which is a very, very good website. And that has a lot of articles and topics of interest based around these kind of things. I think the general viewpoint about adrenaline seems to be is that we can't kind of pretend it's not there. Of course, everybody's body response is going to be really different. And as we all know, our response is different on different days and occasions. So it's not a guaranteed thing. But they say that the best thing is to actually meet it and greet it and go like, there you are. I know who you are. You troublemaker. And so you actually acknowledge it, but I think there must be a bit of a bloody-minded determination not to let it take over. And so the more we can be a bit dogged, a bit dig our heels in, but the most thing is that autopilot is so strong. But the other thing personally I find helpful is that if I'm feeling like the concentration is wavering and the adrenaline's starting to get in the way, I just absolutely force myself to concentrate. And it's actually kind of singing in your head. So you see the notes on the page and you're absolutely intently you're zoning down on that. Because then I think it helps to, to shut it out and get yourself calmed down. Then, of course, in the terms of calming down, as many people will say, one of the effects will be that the breathing tends to be shallower. And also, I was so aware of this in an orchestra sometime, is that sometimes you have long rests and there's very tense music and everyone's going like, just sit, and you suddenly think, I'm not breathing anymore. And so as flute players, it's very, very important that we actually, so often if I have big solos or something coming up, I will intentionally go like, just take a few calm, flowing breaths. And they say another very good thing is to look out of the zone, because it tends to be a sort of defense mechanism because of course adrenaline is largely for like, you're in a bad place, get out of here and watch out. It's a sort of safety thing hardwired into us. And so if you look out, I think it gives you a sense, oh, it's more comfortable. And so anything you can do to think comfort and not feed on anxiety that it wants you to, the better. I know it's often easier said than done. So I would advocate first and foremost the autopilot business, and then I'd look at the sports science, kind of any options you've got on that side. Thirdly, and this is the dodgy bit, but let's face it, a huge amount of people out there use beta blockers and other help in that way. I had a young person I knew who was really struggling. And so I did quite a lot of research for them in the orchestras I was in. And I was really interested because I've never actually used them myself. I did once sort of entertain the idea, but I just never did it. I know some people think, oh, you won't perform so well, but people say they really don't feel that to be the case. They just find it helpful. Big thing I have to say as a responsible person is that of course, there are some people that should not take them for health reasons. So it does need medical supervision. You need to have that discussion with a doctor. And I was really interested in the research I did that actually the most people in orchestras that were using them were string players. So I kind of imagine that people with more on the solo line seats, whether that's a second player or whatever, but people holding their own lines. But what I learned from them is that they feel a huge pressure about letting down the team. Mm-hmm. And so that they feel a huge stress about that. And but the most thing, by far the majority, vast majority of people, like 90% of people I asked, had stopped taking them, but had them in the case. And I was really interested by that. And they said that it just helped them over a bumpy bit and broke a cycle of behavior. I think that's an important thing as well. Recently, a friend of mine, actually I'm writing a book at the moment on flutey stuff, and with her, and she recommended the stuff called Gelsemium sempervirens. So I think it's just regularly available as Gelsemium, but that is a homeopathic anti-anxiety thing that people can, and she said that she knew quite a lot of people that took it. I'd never actually heard of it before, but she swears by that, so there's something else to try. But hopefully something somewhere there will help people deal with that. Cool, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you for your questions. That was from Ina, Antonia and Maria, and we actually have a live question, Michael, if you can you see them on your
I can.
There's one here.
I'm not sure which question. There's quite a lot of comments, but I can't.
Yeah, quite a lot of comments. I'll read it out to you. It's from Ollie Roberts. And he says, you have always played so beautifully and truthfully, yet still managed to develop so many different voices, not just colours. My question is, how do you stay so open to exploring new ways of playing, having already found a great sense of artistry and identity, without being fearful of losing the sense of self in your playing?
Can you read that again, Camilla? I'm joking. I thought you did. Ollie, that's incredibly kind of nice thing to say. And I know Ollie of old, wonderful musician, player, and person. I think sometimes I'm a bit weird. I fear because. I'm kind of got I wouldn't call it restless spirit, but inquisitive spirit. And I'm always of the viewpoint of like, if somebody else has got something I haven't got, I want it. Not in literal terms, like I'm going to go shoplifting, but you know what I mean? But I'm just fascinated by tastes and experiences, and all the different ways of being there are. But also in music, music, I remember people always saying when I was young, they would say this business about life mirrors art, art mirrors life, rather. It just went like, shoof. I went like, oh, that's a cute phrase. I have no idea what they're talking about. Or at least I kind of thought, really? I just didn't do anything for me, really, particularly. But as I've gone on, I just like, it is so flippin' true. And I never realized that everything, whether it's a raindrop hitting your face, or whether it's a very fantastic wine, or whether it's that bubble up of anger sometimes, or whatever it can be, or a sudden disappointment. Whatever these things are, they're in the music for me. So I think music exists so much in the emotional realm. And as we talked last week, it's just so fascinating because it's so uber sensitive. And so I think it's like watching a whole day go past in fast motion photography with the same scene, but you just get so many different lights and this passing here, there, and everything, and the wind coming here, and whatever changes. But the whole kind of emotional spectrum shifting in music continuously. And so I like to sort of feel like, that you kind of get your suckers out and attach yourself to that flow, and kind of like drink it in, and then just think, what's that on about? And what does it mean to me? And so often you can't say, you know what I mean? Because music, this is an extraordinary language. And it's really funny because, we can do language, but nobody knows what's music on about, but everyone can understand it. And it just seems absolutely weird, to be honest. But for some reason, I think it's just because somehow it voices everything we can feel, but also experience. So kind of, I think that's what I would say is possibly, I've been really open to that kind of thing. And therefore, because I've experienced lots of things, I kind of always want to somehow shove it in the music, you know what I mean? And the other thing is I just do get easily bored. So I love trying stuff out. And I also love variety. And actually, that's a huge point, is because I went through, dare I say it, on this website now, or on this Facebook thingy. But I went through a stage of really thinking the flute wasn't a great instrument. Shock, horror. And I was very regretful I had not played the violin or the cello or piano or whatever. And, I've also actually recently taken up the viola, funny enough. So I'm getting my string fixed now. But the thing is, I then started thinking about, why don't I like the flute so much? And I mean, I did like the beautiful sounds, amazing sounds. But I found, really the thing I felt is that it didn't have a wide enough range of expression. So basically, I've sort of been a bit on a mission throughout my career of trying to push the boundaries and get as much diversity into playing as possible. And I so recommend that, as if you want to have a fun time for the rest of your careers, I would just recommend that as a viewpoint, because the flute's bizarre, really, because it's a hugely flexible instrument. It can do so many things, and dynamically it can be literally it's only second to the trumpet in terms of dynamics. I mean, in terms of decibel levels, absolutely the second loudest instrument, and that's all, of course, about top register. But it also can play infinitesimally soft. But what people do, because they want to play well and comfortably, is settle in the middle somewhere. They sort of have a sort of fairly narrow bracket which is designated, this is my safe zone. But actually the instrument's insanely flexible. So it's good to have, that feeling. I'm just going to take Camilla, can you busk for a moment?
Yes. I think Michael's answered that question quite thoroughly from Ollie. So that's really great. Thank you, Ollie, for your question. I was just going to say, Michael, in this line of thinking with you're saying all the experience you've had and how you want to put them into your music, do you often kind of attach certain images or memories in your mind to parts of music, so that when you come back to that music in a concert, for instance, do you have focuses or images in your mind to help you create that atmosphere?
I tend to, oh, sorry, Camilla. No. I tend to do that a lot with students in teaching. I kind of think of sort of ways, but for myself, I don't. I think I just sort of drink straight from the music. Mm-hmm. And I tend not to and very occasionally, if I'm puzzled by something, because to be honest, sometimes on the flute, we get to play some less than absolutely wonderful music. And so sometimes the music, maybe it needs a bit of help And so if it's not speaking, I'm actually about to play some and record some contemporary music for a sort of live thing online. And the one piece is there's just odd pockets in that piece where you go like, ooh, now what's it doing? Because it's not speaking. And so then I'm looking for analogies or for kind of, so actually, specifically in this one piece, I've got an image of, I don't know how many people know Italian commedia dell'arte, but it's where Pulcinella and Piero and all that sort of thing originates from. So a sort of clown figure. And I mean, in my mind, I've got that little clown over one bit, which I'm struggling with a bit. So occasionally I do, but generally not.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you, Ollie, for your question. So now on to Ron from America asks, why are flutes so outrageously expensive?
Oh. I presume that means high-end flutes.
So yeah.
And because, I mean, it's unbelievable what one can pick up, cheaply. I guess when it comes to the high-end stuff, isn't it simply that it's the handmade element of it? Because otherwise things can be stamped out on any old machine, dumph, 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 so quick. And so as you go up the ranges of the instruments, of course, you get more and more handmade elements of the flutes. But by the time you get to the top-notch ones, there are actually shed loads of hours that those guys are going to be handcrafting stuff. Of course, materials and also kind of devotion and intention. And I think there's also a bit of a prestige markup. Tiny bit, because they like to designate their ranges, and so of course their top one needs to look convincingly expensive. But my experience of it depends if you've got whole factories of makers, but if you've got like lone makers and things, it's hard for them to make ends meet, and it's hard for them to produce enough. Because of just the amount of hours involved. So I think that's really what we're dealing with. And I think, of a lot of us, I mean, maybe a lot of us isn't the right thing, but say a lot of plumbers, if they, worked for those many hours, but also you're asking, of course, the finest craftsmanship at the same time, I'm not surprised that, we're paying a fair whack. But also, if it cheers you up, I just say that thank goodness we don't play bassoons because they're insanely expensive. And of course, clarinets need so many other things by the time they've done all their various clarinets, E-flats and bassets and possibly saxophones, etc., etc. And of course, oboes also wear out and crack so easily. So I think it could be worse. And then was there another question from Debbie as well, or Deborah?
Well, from Deb, there was a similar question. Well, it was actually, what flute brand, metal type, and head joint do you prefer to play in each venue, e.g. orchestral, recital, quartet, quintet, solo with orchestra, etc., and why? And someone also Tiffany just asked a similar question on the live stream, so I'll put that up there.
Okay, so Tiffany, I'll answer yours first of all. I play on Altus flutes, and I'm an artist for them. I've actually recently just changed because I was on what is an AL model in UK terms. I can't remember the numbers. Sometimes they have numbers, sometimes they have letters. I can't remember the number that comes with that, but you could research that by just looking at AL. And it was really interesting because basically I was always a Louis Lott player. I used to play for a while, I was playing on a flute that was made in, let me get this right, it was made 6 years after. So it was made in 1857. And it had been a little bit doctored for modern playing. But, these were the original French Böhm system flutes. So Böhm system was first exhibited in 1851, and 6 years later they're making an amazing flute. So for instance, when I used to be in the London Symphony Orchestra, I was playing Louis Lott's then. And so at some point I was doing a lot more contemporary music, so I decided I needed a flute with a B foot joint, because whenever I had to play with a B foot joint and put one on, I was grumpy, which is very bad. We can't have that. So I decided I need to buy a flute with a B foot joint, and then I went into the shops and everything, and actually I had a really freaky experience, because this lady came through, and she works in the sheet music department, and she came in and she said, "Michael, I spend my life trying to shut out the sound of the flute," working in a flute shop, as she does. And she said, "But whichever one that is, that's amazing. I would get that one." And so that was, I took her advice. I couldn't argue with it. But when I spoke to the guy who runs the shop, he said, "Well, of course you like that one, because it's actually modeled on Louis Lott flutes." Mm. But recently I had a very happy thing in Germany. I was doing some work, and this wonderful guy called Manfred, he was there, and he just said, "Oh, I play on altus as well. Would you want to try my flute?" And I just tried it, and I've never done anything like this before, but the words just came out of my mouth. It was like, "If you ever sell this flute, please can you let me know?" And he said, "I am selling this flute." And I was thinking it was going to be hugely expensive, and he sold it me such a reasonable price, and it's just a dream. But that is actually a PS model, and that is exactly the same as Dennis Buryakov plays. But more than that, you asked about head joints as well. People tend not to play on the altus head joints themselves. So generally people go looking for another head joint to put on those flutes. And certainly that's the same for me. And it turns out that both of us also play on exactly the same cut and style of Miguel Arista head joints. So we're actually now exactly the same setup. And there's a lot of other players out there, top players who are on a similar thing. What was the first question? Deb's one about venues and things.
Yeah.
Choice would be a fine thing, I could say. I actually, when I went to that the sort of convention-y thing in Germany, I was kind of like the invited guest. But all these like principal flutes and like really notable flute players from around Germany assembled. But it seemed that they all had at least about 9 flutes. I mean, at least 6 actually, but quite a few had about 9. And this one guy had 16. And I just couldn't believe it, because I have 2. I have mine and a sort of twin as a backup, which I like a lot less, even though it used to be my main flute. But I have dabbled with playing wood. I had a Rudel cart for a while. I had a wooden Louis Lott flute. And I have, I don't know whether people know, but I also do play traverso. So I play Baroque as well, but I also play classical flute. So I've done those. So I've had a little, a variety. And I did briefly in my career dabble with trying different kit for different types of music making, because I heard it was a cool thing to do. But to be honest, I kind of decided that what I kind of like in players is a distinctiveness. And I think it's fun and it's cool, but actually I kind of like that I've got my own style. And what I've always been after is more like trying to find variety on the setup I've got, rather than providing the variety by changing setup. And I think in playing life, there's a huge set of variables depending on where you're playing, who you're playing with. And so I sometimes think, I do remember when I was playing wood, I actually had a flute with a reverse thumb, which is a terrible thing if anyone's ever experienced that. And the trill keys were all in completely different places from normal as well. So it was very, very confusing. But what I found is that if there was any intonational problem already within a wind section, it really wasn't helping that I was sort of messing around. And I don't think they took to it that kindly. Anyway, so next.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, hang on.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just remembered something. Ron asked me to mention something, and I've researched this. There's a guy called Jeremy Steig. I hope that's how you pronounce it. He's a jazz flute player. Unbelievable. Check it out. Jeremy Steig is the name. But and he actually had the same teacher apparently as Ron, who wrote in that question. But he's also written something that Ron says he is wild and fascinating, which is a book of memoirs. And I thought that might be a really cool read for us, to actually get into that kind of insight as a flute player into that kind of jazz world. And if it's wild and fascinating, that's all good by me. And it's called Get Me Out of Here, and it's published by Byroad Press.
Great. Thank you. Michael, it's already 1:45. Would you like to answer one more question quickly? Or
yeah, why not?
Okay. Yeah. So our next one from Jonathan Tyndall is, how did you prepare for various auditions before winning the BBC flute position? Would you like? I have discussed audition preparation a little bit already.
No, that's fine. No, they've got specific thoughts about this.
Okay.
So you're not going to like this, Jonathan. I've been tipped off you, maybe otherwise known as JT. But do you know what? I've my career path's gone like this, right? So I was in the BBC Symphony Orchestra as a co-principal, which in UK terms means like a joint principal. They have like a senior one and a junior one, and this is like the junior one. And then I went to the London Symphony Orchestra. I then got offered a job in the Halle Orchestra in Manchester, and then I got into London's Mozart Players, Britten Symphonia, Academy St Martin's, London Symphony Orchestra, and finally went back to the BBC. And I didn't audition for any of them. Scandal. Absolute scandal. So it was all on invitation to go in and play, and then everyone like, oh, he sounds all right, let's have him. So lucky me, lucky me. But I did have a kind of big period of audition making, so I do have experience. And before I got my first job in the BBC, I was actually in the UK. We have this trial system, so you do an audition, nobody gets offered a job at that point. So that then starts a long procedure of inviting people into the orchestra, and this can go on. I've known instances of it going for 7 years before they eventually decide who they're going to have. So it's very, very long-winded. So I did do a lot of auditions, and then I remember at one point I had 6 trials when I first got my first job at the same time. So what does one need to do? What this whole business of auditioning? What? And my big thing is just so simple. It's just like, be the best possible musician you can be, and be the best player you can be. But then I'd add another one, which is be the best stylist you can be. And I think this often gets underrated in terms of the auditions, because you just want to hear those people and go like, they get it. They play beautifully. They make the most beautiful sound. They communicate. That's another thing I'd say, is be the best communicator you can be. But that whole thing of actually just that, what are you trying to prove in an audition is that basically that everybody can just go like, yep, they get it. That's, that just feels so good, and it's lovely. The first thing I'd say, as an encouragement to everybody that is facing auditions, is that as now somebody who's been on a lot of panels, I never like being on panels. I always feel like I should go and take a shower afterwards, because I feel like a kind of dirty person. But is that as panelists, what we're waiting for and what we're looking for all the time is someone to walk in and make something special happen and make us go like, well done, that was beautiful. And even if it's not relentlessly good through the whole audition, it's just so important that the focus is on giving something special to the people you're playing for. Because I just sort of like, I can remember actually doing a competition when I was young, and I looked out at this old kind of fossil of a flute player who was on the audition panel, and I thought, he looks starchy, he looks dry. And then I can remember actually adjudicating on exactly the same panel for the same competition and being that person. And I was just giggling to myself thinking, I bet you that person playing is just looking out thinking, who's that old fossil? But the thing to remember is panelists are human beings, believe it or not. And actually they're rooting for you. They really, really are. I mean, I've only ever sat on one weird panel where there was one guy who was just so pernickety. But generally everyone's rooting for you. So in terms of auditions, I think the thing we need to all think about is all the component parts of playing, because my viewpoint about who gets the gigs and how to be successful about auditioning is the business of, think of it as like a package mentality. So it's more about how great a percentage of a lot of the different things you have to do are in place. So I've just sort of written a little list for myself, excuse me, looking over to the side, but rhythm, style, intonation, communication and personality, articulation, expressive range, legato, dynamic range, control, technique, intelligence, flexibility, love, sound, vibrato. And those are just thinking about it, those are the component-y kind of things, but there've been many more that I haven't thought of. And I would suggest for everybody, you kind of write out your own list of all the things that you think are there. And basically the things that are going to win you auditions is to have a lot of those in place and to be able to deliver them. And then we're back thereafter to autopilots, because for anything, of all the things we do, that autopilot has to be so strong, because it's such a weird task, isn't it? Because we're not playing with the harmony, we're not playing with the texture, we're not playing with the beautiful sounds that surround us. We have no support. There's a sort of tension in the air that you need to break. So the really difficult thing is to really express love of music through what you do. So the more we focus on the kind of pernickety side of, I need to get this exactly right, and it needs to be like this for this person, or it needs to be, if I do this, then they'll think this, or, all those mind games that can happen are just so detrimental to my mind. What the panel are looking for are those players that just sweep them away. So of course, those things have to be in place, the stylistic things, the rhythmic things, the rhythm's so huge in auditions and so difficult, again, because you don't have any supportive pulse going. But basically it's the joy and the actual sensuality of what you do, but also that you can prove that you can chop and change between all those examples. And I was thinking that from Antonia earlier, this whole kind of sensual thing that every excerpt is, you treat it like a jewel, and each one is its own little miniature painting, and exquisite in its own way, and also sort of like distilled essence of a style or a way of being. And so the more we can do our little gear changes, the better. And so yeah, we do need to nail it, but the love and the joy should be paramount.
Brilliant.
Easier said than done, I know, but
that's a great answer, I think. I think that's all we have time for today. We still have loads of questions to get through, but we're coming back next week.
We are coming back next week, but it's going to be Friday of next week, if that's okay.
Yes.
So same time, 7 o'clock in the evening, UK time, British summer time. But it's going to be Friday of next week, because I've just got a mountain of stuff to record and get done before I get to Friday.
Yeah.
Tuesday would not be good.
Michael's still busy as always. So next week we'll get on to next week going to talk about practice plans, and we have some more questions from Maria, Marianella and Michael Wood. So we'll get on to everyone's questions. So thank you to everyone who sent them in. We will get to them. Yeah,
definitely. And keep coming with the questions on when we're live as well. It'd be cool.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great.
Yes.
Great.
Thanks everybody. Have a great week.
See you soon.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.